I'm a member of the Linked Open Data Community Practice Working Group. Thank you for starting the recording, Shelby. And today we're going to have a panel discussion and lots of time for question and discussion after that. As I said, I'm Ken Varnum, a member of the Linked Open Data Working Group. And I am at the University of Michigan, where I work on the university library's discovery interfaces as a project manager. This morning, we're going to cover, or afternoon, we're going to cover a couple of things. First, Xiaoli Li, who's the chair of our working group, will provide a brief overview of what the working group does. Then we'll have the two panel presentations by Quinn, Hart and Greta Heng, and I will introduce them just before their presentations. And then finally, we will have a question and discussion. And due to the size of this group, we will certainly allow people to unmute themselves and ask questions. But if you could, it would be most helpful if you could add questions to the Google Doc, which I have just put in the chat. Feel free to do so with your name or without, as you prefer. And we will use that as the starting point for conversation, but I hope that we will be able to have a more free-flowing conversation as we go on with the series of presentations. Everyone is muted on entry, and we'd appreciate it just for keeping down the background chatter. If you keep your settings on mute until there's a question. So yes, I think that's all the background information that we have. So first, if I could ask Xiaoli to just give a brief overview of the working group and what it is that we do.
Thank you, Ken. And hello, everyone. My name is Xiaoli Li. I'm head of content support services at the University of California, Davis. So this is a working group, it's a joint working group, which means we have members come from both IGELU and ELUNA. As a community practice working group, and our goal is to work with you and to promote and advocate your linked data needs. In order to do that, we definitely have different means, and having the meeting like this is a great way to not only share what is currently available in Libris product, but also engage your needs. And that will help us to know where we should focus our effort. So in addition to having the meetings like this, and we're also working very closely with other Alma, Primo, and Samen working groups to get the feedback from other Libris working groups. So with that, I know we have two excellent presentations today. We all want to know how we can actually use linked data to really promote library resources. And that's our goal, right? Having cataloging and having discovery is make our resource can be used as easily as possible. So I'm looking forward to today's presentation, and thanks to the presenters and to Ken for willingness to organizing this event. With that, I'm going to turn back to Ken.
Thank you very much, Xiaoli. I'd like now just to briefly introduce our panel presenters. And it's also been pointed out to me that I shared the wrong link. That was the questions document for the previous iteration of our community of practice. So I will be the corrected link for questions for you to add, I believe, I hope, is the one I just put in. So apologies for the misdirection, and I hope I haven't misdirected us yet again. Our two speakers today, we have, I'd like to introduce Greta Heng, who is a cataloging and metadata strategies librarian at San Diego State University. Her main responsibilities consist of electronic resources management and evaluating and enhancing cataloging and metadata workflows. Her research interests include analyzing user data, name authority control, and linked data. And Greta's presentation will be the second. Our first speaker is Quinn Hart, the Application Development Manager at the University of California Davis Library. Many of the library's locally developed applications, like their online digital collections and Aggie Expert Scholarly Research Project, use linked data management systems. Quinn will be talking about Ex Libris's public linked data representations. Quinn, the floor is yours.
Excellent, thank you. So let me share my application here. And I'm gonna just assume that everyone can see that. Let me know if that's not the case. So yes, I thank you, Ken and Xiaoli, for inviting me here. I work with Xiaoli at the UC Davis Library. I'm not an administrator at all of Primo or Alma. I'm a consumer, really, of that data. And so this kind of started with me sort of being a little complaining about some of the aspects of that. So she said, well, tell us about it. So that's kind of the start of this talk, where I'll be talking about some of the linked data for Ex Libris, mostly in search engine optimization, but I'll talk a little bit about some other aspects as well. So there'll be four major components that I want to talk about. First is just kind of a brief overview of search engine optimization, which I'll hopefully just call SEO from now on. And then I'll go into how it's actually integrated in Primo and how you set it up and how it works. And then from there, I'll talk about some of the detailed implementations of how Primo implements SEO and how it can affect some uses of it. And then I'll kind of have a brief discussion about Alma's linked data integration as well, which is kind of a partner type of thing. So there are two major components of SEO. The first is to allow machines to discover all of the items that might exist at a website. And then a companion component of that is to allow better descriptions of each one of those items. So it's important for to tell a machine all of the items that might exist, because if it's, for example, driven by a database like Primo, it's very hard to be able to browse and discover all of the pages. And by doing it actively this way, you can get a list of all of the items directly to web crawlers to say, these are in particular the items that I want you to index. And so you have more control over that. And it's not particular to one search engine or not, it's an open standard. It should be available to everyone. And the companion component of that is that when you browse any one of these web pages through the crawler, they expect to have a more detailed description of that particular item. And that's also standardized on schema.org, which is a methodology for describing the metadata. And part of that allows you to talk about different types. So for Primo, that might be books or movies or data sets or articles. And then it's well formatted so that you can unambiguously say, this is a keyword, this is a creator, this is a title that's associated with it. And the way it actually works in the back is it's a little bit of a dance. So on the left-hand side, you have Google or any other search engine that's interested in it. And the first thing that you do is you go to a robots.txt file, which is a standard file that exists on all the Primo instances, kind of on all websites or most websites as well. And you can search in there and look for an indicator that a site index exists. And then if you find that site index, you go and collect that index as well. And in some cases, you would get back a list of all of the items that are on that page that you want to search. But there's a limit at about 50,000. So instead, the site index actually is a list of smaller files that contain up to 50,000 records. And so then you download each one of those individual lists in order to get your complete list of URLs that you want to search. And then you go back and search that URL and look at the URL itself to find the metadata about that record. So here at the bottom, you'll see in the header usually of the HTML documents, you have a little script that's identified with the metadata by calling it an application of linked data, and they like to have a JSON format. And then you have that well-formatted metadata. And then this can be used in order to do your indexing. At the University of Davis here, California Davis here, we don't get a lot of search results directly from Google. We get a few. So last month, this was the link that brought most directly to our Primo instance when people were searching for this particular book on avian diseases. we came up in general about the 8th or 9th hit on that. And so got, 100 or so hits last month from that particular item. But you can actually do more sophisticated things than just feed the general index. And this example actually isn't from Primo, but it's from one of our other sites. We have our digital collections, and our digital collections uses SEO as well. And so in this one particular example that we have of wine labels, we identify that first as a collection, but we also identify it as a data set. And what happens is Google and other ones are able to search that and then see that this is a data set and do some more sophisticated type of searching on it. So Google has a data set search engine. So if you search wine labels in that, since there's not too many data sets about wine labels, ours comes up as the first result for that. And it's specially formatted to kind of be particular to a data set. So there's other good, nice features about SEO like that. So now I'm going to move into the integration of how you do this. And this will be mostly with Primo VE, and there's some sort of associated things with back office as well. But it's a relatively easy configuration. In the publishing profile, you actually have 3 links that say that you're publishing records to Google, but really this is just filling out the normal standard SEO for all of these. And when you click on making one of those active, you have 2 particular components that you're looking at. The first part is the publishing parameters, where you can define the URL base name that it searches, which corresponds to your Primo site, the view that you're interested in showing it, and some scheduling, which I think is still all manual right now. But the more important component is at the bottom, you pick the content that you're interested in for that sitemap. And so the content actually corresponds to one of your search profiles. And that's really the main reason that they give you 3 setups in Primo VE, is so that you can pick 3 different parts of your search profiles to put those in. And so we have about 8 different search profiles to choose from in our particular location, and you can choose up to 3 of those. Now, that affects obviously the content that goes into the sitemap and what items are identified to be searched by the crawlers. Ex Libris gives a little bit of information about that. They say that for consortium, you should make sure that the search profiles that you use are really for the local institution data only. And they go even farther to say that you should really consider potentially just publishing those things that are unique to your particular library. So maybe things in your special collections or items like that. There's also a configuration for adding Google Search Console into your Primo as well. And that's an important step if you want to be able to kind of monitor how the search is being used within Google. And there's a little bit of a dance where you have to prove that you're the owner of Primo, but it's not very difficult either. So we've started this using the integration and investigating how the SEO works so far, and we're kind of working through some execution issues through that Primo currently. So some of them are that we find item mismatch. So the sitemap will actually publish items. When you go back and actually try to find them through the search interface, they don't exist at all. And we have the opposite problem too, where we have some items that we expect to see in the search profile that don't actually show up in the sitemap. And so we're still working on those things. The sitemaps as well have some issues. They're not properly reset. When you make changes to the search profile in one of those implementations, it leaves a number of kind of ghost sitemaps around, which can confuse the search engines. And one thing that we think would be better is that if you actually, for each one of those profiles that you added, if you added a new sitemap to the robots.txt, instead of kind of appending them together, which is the current methodology, it would give you a little bit more ability to administer those through the Google search appliance, for example, or search interface. Google actually finds some issues with the current implementation as well. They like to understand what the canonical name is for each individual item that they're indexing. And Primo has many names to point back to the same location, and so that can be difficult for them to figure that out. Google identifies some metadata problems with the schema.org items as well, and some of the views aren't mobile friendly. But there's other reasons to have SEO as well. So we talked a lot about Google search, but you might be more interested in actually in more generic searches like DuckDuckGo or something that's an anonymous style search that you want to make sure that you're supporting that well. And there's other aspects even outside of search that you might want to use this for. Outside individuals might be interested in looking at your search index, downloading all of the metadata to investigate the entire corpus of your data for some other reason, which we think that we kind of want to encourage that type of work. And then also for that individual item metadata that exists in the documents, we'd like to repurpose that as well. And so for an example that we're looking at investigating at our library is a web component that would allow librarians that were filling out LibGuides, for example, just to add a single tag. And this web components are a standard way of extending HTML. Add a single tag, cut out a permalink, link it in, and then that tag would actually go and collect all of the information and build a nice, better representation of that in their guides or however we would use those. But there's actually some implementation issues in the way that Primo works in terms of satisfying some of these other requests. And the way that we're going to look at that is to look at how the structured data looks to different tools. And so there's multiple ones. And so the one that Google uses is their rich results test, which you can see exactly how pages are indexed. And schema.org has their own validation tool as well, which is kind of more of a general purpose indexing validation. And what happens is when you look at the results from these two different things, you get quite different results. So if you look at the Google rich text search of a particular URL, you can see that Google does complain that a few of the fields are missing for a particular thing. But for the most part, it's actually filling in the right components. It shows that it's a movie and the people that are involved with it and a link back to the item. When you look at that same URL via the schema.org validator, you get absolutely no information at all back from that particular site. And the reason for that is kind of a technical way in terms of the way that Primo actually goes about doing its display. So in reality, Primo requires a lot of work from the browser in order to do the display. When you go to one of these individual URLs that are associated with the item within your search, you don't actually get any information originally that's specific to that item. Instead, what you get back is a common template that's associated with the view that is coming from that Primo instance. And then it's only when in the browser that it starts to perform some JavaScript functionality, looks at the path, and then goes back to Primo and asks again for the data that's very specific to that particular item. And this is through an API that responds with JSON that's kind of idiosyncratic to the Primo platform. And then once it gets that JSON back, it goes and does other functions in JavaScript and then fills out that metadata form. So when you call this original HTML document and you're not doing it via a browser, you see a script area that's completely empty of metadata. And it's only after you've rendered it that you see this type of information that exists. So that has some issues. So this dynamic metadata entry strategy requires that you actually do page rendering of that item. And so the biggest reason that there's a disparity between how Google sees an item and how a generic search engine might is because Google actually does do that page rendering, usually through a mobile phone engine in order to do that. So that's why the schema.org validator fails. And as a result, you can't use sort of simple tools in order to look at this information. You can't just download the HTML document corresponding to your item and expect to see the metadata there directly. In addition, when we are looking at building a web component that allows us to build these specialized features from the item metadata, you can see here that we could access this API and get the JSON back and build it from that. But that has problems as well. There is no browser access that's allowed to that Primo API endpoint. And that's because by default, browsers won't allow you to make calls to cross-site or that's different site APIs unless that API explicitly allows you to do that. And the Primo APIs don't allow that. And so even if we wanted to create a web component that accessed that JSON specifically to build that, we wouldn't be able to do that either. So that's kind of a segue into the Alma linked data integration. So Alma also has a linked data format as well. They show kind of in their general purpose picture, they take the MARC record, they enrich it, they transform it to linked data, and then they store that in a common location. And so inside Alma's integration profile list, there's a little linked data opt-in code, which if you click on making this active, all of the items that are in your institutional zone will be converted into these linked data records and then stored in a common location at Ex Libris, which includes your institution and then the Alma record there. Now the data that's there is limited. It's less complete than what you get in those records through Primo, but it's actually kind of the key data. And because they've done this extra step where they've made specific links to persistent identifiers for the authors and the subjects, the metadata there is actually better in a lot of cases than what you get from the SEO metadata through the Primo instance. The problems with it, of course, are it's not associated with SEO at all, so there's no way to build a tool around this unless you know that this exists. It uses different schemas. It uses Dublin Core and Bibo instead of schema.org, which just causes a little bit of crosswalk between those. And then you're only sure to see items in your own institutional zone in this particular case. And so you might not see them in a network zone, for example, if you're in a consortium. But because that API is open and it has these linked data records, it is what we're currently using as our testing for building a web component to do this. So the idea is in a similar way where a librarian or anyone will select a permalink from the search engine, add it into a particular tag, but the actual component, instead of going to the library search at all, will just check to see if that exists in Ex Libris's open common linked data format. And if it does, then it will be able to render it. And if it doesn't, then it will come up with some sort of default solution. And we're currently working with our network zone to try to get them to adopt adding those in as well. And we've noticed that not all of the records that are in our institutional zone have made it there. So we're working on improving the hit rate that we get from that as well. So in summary, we talked a little bit about the Primo integration. I already identified some of the problems that we've had. I should say that it's probably better to start with your smallest search profiles and then work up from there. I think we kind of made a mistake by trying to include all of our institutional data as a first step without verifying that we understood all the steps as we were going with that. And then I have identified that the Primo implementation is kind of specific to Google or to areas that can dynamically generate data. And it would be much better for general support if that first call back from Primo actually included the metadata directly within those tags. And then finally, I talked a little bit about Alma's data integration and showed that that's really a good resource for some items. That's nice data. We like that quite a bit. But it's not a complete solution for all of the items that you might find in your Primo search. And that is it. And so I will stop sharing. And then Ken, would you like me to just hand it directly off to Greta?
Yes, that's fine. So thank you very
Greta.
much, Quinn, for that. And Greta, you may share your screen, please.
Okay, give me a second. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Greta Heng, the Cataloging and Metadata Strategies Librarian at San Diego State University. Today, I'm going to talk about a Primo VE plugin, author card. In today's talk, I will introduce what is author card, how does it work, how to install it, the issues I've found, and other similar linked data tools that can improve users' discovery experience. Author card is a discovery portal add-on, currently works only with Primo VE, and it is developed by Libris. Once implemented, in theory, it can gather basic information about one author from several linked data name authority sources. As this picture shows, after installation, there will be a new section at the bottom of the book level or resource level page on Primo VE. If the author card finds a linked data entity of the author, depending on the completeness of information about the person on the web, it might show the author's picture, name, occupation, nationality, birth and death date, biography, and notable works. Let's use an example to explain how the author card works. Say we have a book, Pride and Prejudice, written by Jane Austen. In the BIP record, the author information is shown in the 100 field. To get the author's information from the web, we need a connection between the BIP data and the online data. Libris has a linked data service. As the picture shows, once user configured linked data integration profile, they can enrich the name authorities and subject headings in the MARC records with URIs from Library of Congress name authority files, LCNNF, Virtual International Authority file, VF, German National Library headings, GND, and several other sources. The linked data service can translate MARC to 3 linked data formats: MARC XML, BibFrame, and JSON-LD. With this linked data service enabled, the author in the 100 field becomes the names in DC creator. For this example, we have 2 URIs for Jane Austen. One is from LCNNF, and the other one is from VF. Author card will then take advantage of the JSON-LD version of the linked data BIP record and query author URIs in the JSON-LD file. If interested, you can take a look at the JSON-LD version of BIP data for this example through the link in the red box. The next step is to use the URIs to get the author's information from the web. Libris uses a tool developed by University of Wisconsin-Madison. And actually, the whole idea of this author card was originally from Wisconsin-Madison's BIP card, which we will talk about it later. Libris adopted BIP card and created a serverless API. From the JSON-LD file, the author card program extracts the LCNNF from the value of creator ID element and builds the API request to make it like the request in the green box. They put the LCNNF after the URL equal symbol. The API request will then return the JSON-LD file about the author, like this one. This file contains the information we saw on the screenshot of author card earlier: the author's name, occupation, biography, notable works, etc., etc. From the picture, it is very clear that the information about this author is gathered mainly from 2 sources, DBpedia and Wikipedia. And there's actually a 3rd source VF headed here. Well, let's look back a little bit. In the second step, we said that Libris uses LCNNF to get author's data, but why in this JSON-LD, LCNNF is not here? Let's dig deeper into the customized beepcard code. I found that beepcard is centered around VF, not LCNNF. From LCNNF, it uses VF Translate Source API to get the name's VF link. Then it grabs information about the author and the person's other name authority links, if there's one in Wikidata or DBpedia in VF. So the author's name, birth date, death date, and VF URI are from VF RDF file. Occupation, notable works, and college or schools attended by the author are from Wikidata. And the image and short biography are from DBpedia. And finally, using the JSON-LD, the file I just showed, author cards can be generated. Libris adds this new module to the resource level page in the JavaScript in Primo VE. And if you're interested to see how it looks in your search engine, you can copy and paste the link at the bottom and feel free to make a new search to explore it. The link is SDSU Libraries test view for author card. While the code sounds complicated, it's very easy to install this new package in Primo VE. In Alma, go to Discovery in the navigation bar, and then select Configure View. You can duplicate or create a new view and then edit it. I don't recommend to install this package directly in your current view because first, this package has several issues, and second, after installation, it will change the theme of your website. For us, the red and black theme is replaced with the blue and white default theme, but you can change it back to your color preference after an implementation. Then in the view configuration, click Manage Customization Package and go to Primo Studio. Then select Add-on and find the link data author card. Click on the button Add, and please be patient on this step. It may take you a few minutes. And once you install the package, before you click back to configuration, go to Download and save this view. All the changes we make in Primo Studio cannot be automatically saved, and you need to do it manually. And after downloading the package in Primo Studio, go back to the view configuration and upload the package. Save it, and then go to the view to see how it looks in your discovery portal. I installed this package in August in a test view and played around with it for a while. I think the idea is very brilliant. We all want to see the usage of linked data outside of the technical service and how it helped with discovery. This product just releases and leverages the power of linked data. And it is a real-time searching. We don't need to have a database or server to store the author information. It is very amazing. But I also noticed some issues about this package. The first issue is very obvious. The more info section runs too slow. When I gave a demo to my colleagues, I waited for a really long 30 seconds or so for the page to load the author card. Could optimize their script and algorithm, it can run faster. Remember when I introduced how the author cards work, I explained that the input of beepcard is LCNNF. It gets LCNNF from the linked data JSON-LD beep record, converts the LCNNF to VF, and then gathers author info using VF RDF files. But VF link is right there in the JSON-LD beep record. The value of creator same as exactly the same for the request of VF Translate Source API. It is possible for beepcard to get VF link directly from the JSON-LD beep record and make the program more efficient. The second issue is more complex and not easy to fix. Since this tool's name is author card, we expected to find information about the author in the 100 field, but it is not the case. It may also give us the names in the 600 and 700 fields. It can present information about the contributors, subject headings, and even fictitious characters in the novels. Let's see this example, rereading Harry Potter. The author of this book is Susan Gupta. Susan is in the 100 field. This record does not have 700 field, and J.K. Rowling is the value of 600 field. However, the author Susan is not shown in the author card. Instead, it shows the information about J.K. Rowling. Remember I mentioned that BIP card contains author's URI from DC creators in the JSON-LD BIP records. To find out why this happened for this book, I checked the link data JSON-LD BIP record, and to my surprise, there are 8 creators in the JSON-LD file. The last one is the author Susan Gupta. And the others are all translated from 600 fields. Here we found 2 issues. First, 600 fields should not be the value of creators. And second, the linked data JSON-LD have duplicated creators. It has 4 for J.K. Rowling. 2 are pure strings, 2 are URIs. It seems that Libris just takes all the names in the MARC records and dumps them into the JSON-LD file. The third issue is encoding problem. For example, the Chinese author Sun Lu's name is not properly shown. But this problem does not happen all the time. Usually after refreshing, the names turn out to be correct. And next, I want to talk about the value of name label auxiliaries used for author card. Let's look at this book, Pride and Prejudice, once again. I feel the names in the author card really bothers me. The name string is different from the names in the book description and MARC record. The names here are inconsistent. To me, J. Austin does not look right. It should not be used as the preferred name label by Libris in author card. The reason why it has this issue is that the name value in author card is taken from VF-RDF. VF-RDF uses schema name, this property, for names, and J. Austin is the value for names in VF-RDF. Even though the value of the name label for this person in VF web page is different, J. Austin is the one and only value for in English of schema name property. For consistency, I would suggest Libris uses the author's name in the MARC record as the value for the name in author card. Compared with author card, University of Wisconsin-Madison's BIP card is more powerful. It can show more than 1 names, including author, contributors, and subject headings. They also add more information to the BIP card, like influence relationship, the same as links, and also they take information from Getty as well. ETH Library developed their own version of author card in Primo and Primo VE. Like the picture on the right, they get the information about the author from Wikidata and GND. When a user enters a search term, they could offer the user a list of possible names and link the names to their author card or their version of author card. This library just presented this tool in 2021 Semantic Web in Libraries conference. I put their presentation slides and a few links about this project at the bottom. If you want more information, go and check them out. We've come to the end of my presentation. I understand that it may take you some time for you to implement and explore this tool. If you have any questions about author card after today's session, send me an email and I will try my best to help. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Greta, for that presentation, and you as well, Quinn. I want to turn now to the important bit, the conversation, maybe not the important bit, an important bit, the conversation and the questions about this. So there are some questions in the Google Doc. Actually, I'm going, now that I've started sharing, I'm going to stop sharing, and so I can actually see the questions document. And a couple of these were submitted beforehand, and I'm going to, there's some answers in the text, but I will ask if there are answers already in the document, I will just ask our presenters to briefly summarize the answer. So the first question we had was that I noticed the Primo sitemap is only applicable to PBO. Is the author card also only applicable to PBO or VE as well? I'm not sure who that was best answered by.
I think that goes to both. So the sitemaps is just identified differently in the Primo VE that I talked about. They are available in both. It's called Google Search for some reason in VE, but it is the standard search interface for that.
Okay. Do you have anything to add, Greta?
No.
All right. And question number 2, broader strategic and commercial alliances required to ensure that data is ready to be linked, e.g. the community zone and the CDI knowledge base are full of duplicated records or lack of coverage. We really do need to broker discussions and redesign the licenses that currently prevent metadata from being shared across proprietary products. To engender confidence in the community zone and make it linked data ready, why doesn't a company do business with, for example, Backstage Library Works for authority control, cleanup, and maintenance? The amount of work required is too big for Libris to handle. Ditto any of their competitors or ProQuest, but there are specialist companies that can do the work for them. Metadata is a global commodity, so all stakeholders have responsibility for creating, sharing, enriching, and maintaining it. Isn't this the best way to ease the burden on libraries and leverage our metadata improvements for mutual and sustainable benefit? Do either of our presenters have a comment on that, or perhaps we could open the floor to those in the room if there are insights to be offered?
I don't have
panic, so
yeah, I don't have too much. I will note that items that are in the CDI, when I said that there's lots of hit misses, if those were discoverable through a permalink, the strategy that we were using, the Alma link data, wouldn't work for that. Just for that reason, there is no good community access back to that.
Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to offer a suggestion? You can raise your hand using the raise hand feature in the reactions in the lower right, if you're on a desktop machine. Shali.
Thank you. And I think the question seems to me there is probably at least 2 components. One is in general about the quality or duplicate records in both sources, CDI. Oh, somebody need to come in. I will admit the person first. Okay. CDI or the community zone, quality of the record. So in that suggestion or the question or problem, there is another working group actually is taking care of this, which is called a content working group. So for those who submitted that part of the question, I encourage you to actually raise issues through the content working group. But as for the link data component, I think that's relevant to our working group. There is 2 ways we can sort of maybe raise this issue. One is maybe for those who submitted that question, I want to remind you there is idea exchange. You can submit through either Primo product website or the Alma website. So if you have an idea, most importantly, people want to know why you want to have that feature. So you really need to develop your use case. So that's one way to raise the issue and get the community's vote. Once the number of votes are high, Libris will review those ideas. So that's one way to do it. And the other way is we as a working group, we can also examine that issue and to see if we can also advocate for this needs to Libris. I know it's not a direct answer, but that's my thought about how to go about those issues and the questions.
Thank you, Charlie. Moving on to our next question. You mentioned that Alma provides links to authors and subjects of Alma content. Has anyone heard of Libris projecting the addition of any other fields to that profile besides just author and subject? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I think that.
Please.
I'll do my first thing. I think that's a great question. And I did put a pointer in there to what's called the context file. So when you identify JSON as linked data, you include these little context descriptors, which identify the kind of fields that you might expect. And you can see that the Alma context includes many, many more items that could be included in there, mostly from the Bibo schema. And so they sort of, it seems like they've anticipated being able to add more data into those components. And I don't know if any of the records through their open thing have those. The records that we've looked at from our site only include those linked components, but there's really no reason that it shouldn't be. And really, schema.org loves persistent identifiers as well. So there's no reason that when you're talking about creators or subjects in the schema.org representation that you couldn't use the same PIDs pointing back to authorities for those too.
So I've known our linked data group is doing a URI project now to investigate what kind of fields Libris use URI to enhance. And besides author and subjects, Libris also put the link to the works, like 490 field and also 020 fields, which might not be correct according to PCC guidelines, but Libris did put the links URIs to other marked fields.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next question, question 4 in the document. Do the links under notable works lead to a Primo search or somewhere else? And I believe the answer was a Primo search, but is that correct?
Yeah, and I can share my screen to better answer this question.
Please.
So wait a moment. So this is the example I used in my presentation. And if we click the notebook work, it will take us to the Primo search, the book name in our library. So that's a short presentation. Okay.
Thank you. Question number 5. Does the author card work with Primo VE or just Primo? And I see an answer that it's only Primo VE.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for filling that in. Question 6, is it possible to fix the issues with the author card?
Yeah, I think like the answer shown up there, theoretically, yes, but I think the bigger issue is the Libris linked data integration profile, like what they use, the elements they used in the JSON-LD, and if they can be more open about how they do the mapping, like map from Mark to DC or from Mark to their current schema, it'd be more helpful for us to contribute and fix this issue.
All right. See, question 8 is being inserted before question 7, which I think is done now. So let me pop down to the bottom. We are starting to see URIs from something called isbnsearch.org in other instances of metadata and in the web page JSON LD as well. Is anyone from Libris there that can explain why these URIs are there? This URL is not affiliated with the maintainers of ISBN numbers. So I'm not sure if we have other speakers or if we have anyone from Libris attending who is willing to comment on this at this point. Or anybody else who has a thought on this? So please just raise your hand. And if not, perhaps it's something the working group can take up and inquire about in the future. There's a question 8, which I will try to read slowly so the questioner can finish typing it as I go. We are a museum and we are minting UUIDs from museum objects for museum objects and artists. Would the author card function work if we were to insert our collection and artist IDs into our MARC records in order to coordinate library and museum materials? Or are the services for author card limited to Library of Congress Name Authority file, VIAF, Wikipedia, DBpedia?
So the current author card only works for LCNF, VF, and you have to make it have LCNF for it to work.
All right, thank you. That is the end of the entered questions. If there's anybody who has any other questions or comments they'd wish to raise, raise your hand and I will be happy to recognize you in turn. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your name, but Antanas? Are you actually raising your hand? Nope. Anybody else? All right, well, that brings us then, I think, oh.
Sorry, could I say something as a maybe ending? I think as we know, we think linked data would be great to help because in a way we can reuse the data. But again, which means we're always looking for quality data because if there's no good quality linked data, you cannot link either. So there's a technical issues as well as the quality of the record, which means just to show how important create quality metadata is. So one thing to think about is, yes, MARC record is still very important, but we also, as Greta already showed and as Quinn already showed, there is a way to reuse the data from other resources. So for example, Greta showed from Wikidata or DBpedia or other controlled vocabulary or terms. So in a way, as a catalog, we really need to look beyond the MARC. So need to think about how to maybe involved if we really don't think certain areas the quality isn't good, maybe we're involved to help them improve, then we can reuse them. So that's the thing I want to say. Okay, so looks like Stephen has something to say.
Just to follow up on what Shali just said, when we say quality, in real specifics, we're talking about linkage. If a name is linked to an authority, and Alma's pretty good at that, it'll get us somewhere. If we get data that has no links, that has names but no links, it's not going to perform well in a linked data enhanced environment. So we should be leaning on the sources of our records, and that's not mainly OCLC for us, it's a lot of vendors, to say you need to put links in your name record, name descriptions, name access points, because otherwise they're just not going to play in the new environment.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a good point, because in a way, as we've been so used to control the label, meaning how the words of the author and should look like, the name. But one of the important part is we also now need to think about the persistent ID, which in the linked data environment, URI is one of the persistent ID format.
All right, well, thank you very much to our presenters and to the audience for some excellent and thought-provoking questions. We will be sharing the slides and a recording of this presentation, and we'll be making those available through the Linked Open Data listserv. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. You can add them to the Google Doc. And if there's anything we didn't get to, we will do our best to get answers in that document, and we'll of course share them. So please join me in thanking Quinn and Greta for their excellent presentations. And I hope you all have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you.
And thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.